This podcast is made possible by listener members of Nashville Public Radio.
This is the Nash Villager Podcast. It's March 17th, 2025. Happy St. Patrick's Day. On this day in 1775, negotiations were wrapping up on the agreement that opened the area we now call Middle Tennessee to settlement by Irish, Scots-Irish, and other white people. That deal goes by a few names: Henderson's Treaty, the Transylvania Land Purchase, or the Sycamore Shoals Treaty. The North Carolina land speculator who led the effort to secure the land, a guy named Richard Henderson, had the big idea to establish a 14th British colony. He barreled right into trying to figure out how to get Cherokee leaders to hand over control before even sorting out whether the British government would accept the idea of another colony, or whether leaders in North Carolina would give up their claim to land west of the Appalachians. Not to mention that the idea of being a colony was essentially going out of style. I mean, this was 1775. The Declaration of Independence was signed just a little over a year later, and that hardly came out of the blue. But for all the things he messed up, Henderson did find some members of the Cherokee Nation willing to tell him the land could be his. They met for 4 days near what is now called Elizabethton, around the far northeastern corner of Tennessee, and they ended up agreeing on a trade, about 10,000 British pounds worth of goods, in exchange for control of 20 million acres between the Cumberland and Ohio rivers. Many Cherokee people looked at the deal as a sham. Many white people accepted it at face value and began preparations to move right in. I'm Nina Cardona, and this is your daily digest of what's happening around Middle Tennessee with some historical context from Nashville Public Radio, WPLN News. As I've mentioned before on this podcast, that deal to secure our region for settlement came at a kind of a strange time for the area. Middle Tennessee had been Shawnee territory for about a century, but a combination of circumstances led them to move out in the early 1700s. And after that, Cherokee people adopted Middle Tennessee as a hunting area. To some extent, they shared it with a small number of French fur trappers. Some smaller groups of Cherokee probably lived here and there, but they hadn't fully migrated in. That said, the Cherokee Nation did have a significant presence in the state as a whole. This was their land. And so, before Henderson spurred an influx of settlers from North Carolina and Virginia, the language you were most likely to hear around these parts was Cherokee. But then, of course, English speakers became the dominant force, pushing Cherokee people farther and farther south, and then far to the west, under the leadership of President Andrew Jackson, along the Trail of Tears, to present-day Oklahoma, where they were made to live on reservations and pressured to assimilate with mainstream American culture. Today, you'll get a different number for how many native Cherokee speakers survive, depending on who you ask. Those discrepancies likely reflect a difference in what kind of fluency level is counted as truly speaking the language. One count on the high side suggests there may be 2,000 people who grew up speaking Cherokee. Another counts only 140 fluent speakers for whom it is their first language. 140. Now let's put that number in perspective. At the time of the treaty that opened up Middle Tennessee, the Cherokee Nation was still rebuilding after a devastating epidemic, so the population was down to something like 20,000 at that point. Then about 22,000 at the time that they were forcibly moved west, and roughly 4,000 died on that trek. By the turn of the 20th century, Cherokee numbers had grown to about 40,000. And now, with intermarriage and more generations worked into the mix, for the latest census, there are more than 1 million people who claim some degree of Cherokee ancestry. And only 140 of them are truly fluent speakers of the language. Most of those are over the age of 60. If no one does anything, the language will die. But, thankfully, there is an effort in the works to try to keep that from happening. Out in Cookeville at Tennessee Tech, a linguistics expert named Jesse Roberts is part of a project attempting to harness artificial intelligence for teaching people to speak Cherokee. The hope is to develop a tool that can talk to people in the language and give them the conversational practice necessary to master it. The program is modeled on work done in Ireland to preserve Gaelic. It's complicated work. First off, there's not a ton of existing digital material that could be used to teach Cherokee to the AI. It's also a complex language. English uses 26 letters, right? Well, written Cherokee has 85 symbols. And that's necessary because of the way the language combines syllables like Lego blocks to form words that are incredibly dense with meaning. In some cases, a single word can convey what it would take a whole sentence to say in English. And of course, language isn't just vocabulary and grammar. There are the deeper cultural meanings embedded and expressed in Cherokee, just as in any other language. And figuring out how to encode that in the AI model is, well, a really big task. The people working on the program were seeking out native speakers, recording them, asking questions, trying to get as much material and understanding from them to feed into this preservation tool. And of course, this isn't the only effort underway to keep the Cherokee language from fading into obscurity. The nation's leadership organizes in-person language classes within its tribal area and online ones for people who live further afield. Some are open to the public at large, but the focus really is on revitalizing use of the language among their own people. Because as long as members of the Cherokee Nation can speak the words and ideas that go back generations, that's at least a piece of the culture that will continue to find a awareness or home among their people. In just a few minutes, we introduce you to a delightful new series about the things that delight us. Niche to meet you. That's coming up after the newscast.
We know that local government isn't the only part of your life.
Like the mayor, I know that city government isn't the only thing you're concerned with.
We are still struggling to find affordable housing.
They're taking up at this bus stop.
That's one of the unique challenges with my business.
I'm WPLN's Metro reporter, Cynthia Abrams. I'm working to break down topics like transit, housing, and local government to make sure that when you are thinking about Metro, you're getting the full story. Follow my latest stories at WPLN.org.
Here's the latest from WPLN News. Thousands lost power across Middle Tennessee this weekend as storms swept through the area. On Saturday, lightning storms, high winds, and a tornado struck Middle Tennessee. The Federal Aviation Administration ordered a ground stop at BNA until the late afternoon. Trees were downed and water levels rose as Nashville recorded 3.75 inches of rainfall. One home in Robertson County caught fire after lightning struck. Firefighters were able to successfully extinguish it. A storm survey team evaluated the damage in Bedford and Rutherford counties, concluding that an EF1 tornado had moved through with winds hitting 95 miles per hour. The severe threat had concluded before Sunday. And compared to surrounding states, Tennessee escaped relatively unscathed, at least when it came to fatalities. Across Kansas, Missouri, Arkansas, Texas, and Mississippi, at least 30 people were killed as a result of tornadoes and dust storms. Christian activists in Chattanooga are calling on their state senator to end an effort to deny undocumented kids in education. State Senator Bo Watson is sponsor of a bill that would allow public schools to deny enrollment to students without legal status or charge their families tuition.
He says that he is a Christian, and based on the faith that we know, no child should be denied an education just because of where they're from.
That was one of a handful of activists who distributed flyers at Watson's church yesterday morning, encouraging congregants to call his office in protest. Watson's version of the bill differs from the one advancing in the Tennessee House by requiring schools to verify every student's immigration status prior to enrollment. The bill is set to go before a Senate subcommittee tomorrow morning. 9 death row inmates are challenging Tennessee's new lethal injection protocol. Their attorneys argue it induces a torturous death. That's because the lethal injection process is tied to a form of lung damage that causes the sensation of being waterboarded. They also argue that Tennessee has a long history of recklessly mismanaging lethal injections and that the written protocol is vague. The state's first execution in 5 years is scheduled for May. Governor Bill Lee placed a moratorium on executions after a federal investigation found rampant mismanagement of Tennessee's lethal injection drugs. The Trump administration's latest tariffs on raw metals, which took effect last week, have left many local Tennessee companies bracing for the impact. In particular, craft breweries who rely on access to aluminum cans will soon feel the effects of price increases, as aluminum and steel are now subject to a 25% tariff. CNN spoke to the Nashville-based Tailgate Brewery, which operates 9 tap rooms across the state. The company's owner said they would have to assess how much Tailgate could absorb of the losses and how much would have to be passed off to consumers. Prior to the pandemic, Tailgate primarily sourced their aluminum from Canada, but over the last few years, they diversified their sourcing to Canada, China, Jordan, as well as within the United States. The Tennessee Department of Corrections says it's in the process of giving tablet-style computers to every prisoner in the system. A spokesperson says the plan is for all prisoners to have tablets by summertime. At that point, the department will phase out physical mail, other than legal mail. Cards and letters from family and friends will be scanned and emailed to prisoners to read on their tablets. WPLN's Char Daston heard from a prisoner about what physical mail means to him.
Brian Hurst is in the 18th year of a life sentence at Turney Industrial Complex, an hour west of Nashville. He says opening a letter from a friend is a comforting, multi-sensory experience.
It's not uncommon for me to breathe in the aromas from their individual homes when I open the envelopes. Sometimes perfume or cologne, and sometimes air freshener, fresh-baked cookies, cats, or dogs, which is a far cry from the odors we're constantly bombarded with in prison, such as cheap floor cleaner, male body odor, fresh latex paint, or moldy showers.
Sometimes physical mail can be a prized possession, like when Hurst gets drawings from his young nieces and nephews.
I would show their drawings to my friends and then keep them in a folder to look at from time to time. If I was sad or if I was allowing my sentence to weigh heavy on me, I could pull them out, lay them out on my bunk, and remember how loved I am.
Hurst says prisoners were told their mail will be scanned by an outside company, and he doesn't trust that they'll do a good job.
We also have heard horror stories where those vendors in other states where this has already happened don't properly scan the mail, and entire chunks of images and text go missing, never to be retrieved again.
The Department of Corrections says it's phasing out physical mail for safety reasons to reduce contraband. But data from another prison system in Florida showed that less than 2% of contraband entered prisons through the mail. Char Daston, WPLN News.
3 Tennessee men's basketball teams are heading to the big dance. UT, Vanderbilt, and Lipscomb are set to play in the upcoming NCAA tournament. Tennessee pulled a number 2 seed after a strong season and falling to Florida in the final of the SEC tournament, played at Bridgestone this weekend. Vanderbilt is a 10 seed and Lipscomb is 14. And in the women's bracket, 3 other Tennessee teams are also set to compete: the Lady Vols, Tennessee Tech, and Vanderbilt. The first March Madness games begin tomorrow. You'll find more news anytime at WPLN.org. For many people, hobbies are the gateway to finding personal meaning in life and community. That's the premise of the storytelling podcast Niche to Meet You, produced locally by Leslie Eiler Thompson. You may have caught her segments on Morning Edition or This is Nashville. And starting today, WPLN is partnering to bring more of these stories to you. Here's Leslie.
Ready? Tunnel. Tunnel, tunnel, tunnel. Yes, 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 yes.
That's Amy, me, and her dog, Toast. Amy and Toast are training in dog agility, and I got to watch them one sunny afternoon in their front yard. I frequently find myself in situations just like these for my audio project called Niche to Meet You. I get to watch folks involve themselves in little-known but beloved niche activities and tell their stories. Because it's my hobby, my niche interest, to know and to care about other people's niche interests. I've been to an international Santa celebration and watched Santas and Mrs. Clauses of all types joyfully gather together.
Ho, ho, ho! Merry Christmas!
I've observed Nashvillians play a sci-fi tabletop war game called Warhammer 40,000, which boasts some absolutely wonderfully excessive character names.
Ballistus Dreadnought.
Ballistus Dreadnought?
Ballistus Dreadnought.
That's an amazing name.
It's a phenomenal name.
It's unbelievable.
And I've even been to the starting line of the Iditarod, a 1,000-mile dog sled race in Alaska, to watch a legendary musher run his last.
10, 9.
Niche interests are fascinating, and they're also life-saving. And here's why. It begins with loneliness. The statistics on loneliness are shocking. The former U.S. Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, released a report in 2023 with findings that being socially disconnected has actual physical health consequences, Loneliness increases our risk of depression, anxiety, suicide, dementia, and stroke. And this was true of us even before COVID. But the pandemic certainly didn't help. This month marks the 5th anniversary of the official lockdown, and for the people I meet, it played a huge role in bringing them to their own niche. Like for Aaron Welch, he works in construction and travels a lot. But during the pandemic, he was grounded at home with no social interaction except for a new interest in Warhammer 40,000, also called 40K. I mentioned it earlier. It's a sci-fi tabletop wargame involving the painting and deployment of small models on a tabletop against an opponent.
I got into 40K because I got hit hard during COVID. I started painting models back in 2021, and I've been going strong ever since.
For him, this activity, the painting of the models while interacting online with others doing the same thing, gave way to a new social structure that combated a season of loneliness. Another niche that thrived during the pandemic was speed puzzling. At a time when everyone craved the security of solving an impossible problem, puzzles provided one right and sure answer. And the speed puzzling community found ways to meet and compete with people across the world for the first time.
I got to know so many people I would never have crossed paths with under normal circumstances.
That's Tammy McLeod. She's a Guinness Book of World Records holder for fastest individual puzzle time.
It gave you connection.
It did. I wouldn't have had the opportunity to meet them and connect with them as well if it's just in-person events.
Wow.
That's the honest truth of it. It's just kind of strange when you think about it, that isolating myself in my house opened up my borders for me.
And once that season of isolation was over, when going outside our borders was safe, the virtual interaction led to in-person connection, like for the speed puzzlers who traveled to Minnesota for the biggest competition in North America.
Megan's from Minnesota. I'm technically from Canada. Caroline's from California. So we're from all over, and we just found each other on Facebook, Instagram, and made a team.
We met 2 hours ago.
And Aaron, who's now back to traveling for work, still meets up with dozens of other folks when he can, around 40K tables at a game shop in Hermitage on Thursday nights.
One of my favorite memories is I did a tag team game, but we didn't get too far because we just mainly talked and had fun, didn't get to play, but we still enjoyed our time and everything. So it wasn't about the game, it was just getting along and interacting with people, and I'm thankful for it every day. I don't know where I'd be without it right now.
The more connected we are, the happier we are, and the healthier we are. So it isn't any stretch at all to say that niche interests that bring us together can save our lives. Whether you consider it a hobby, a sport, an activity, or even a lifestyle, the Niche to Meet You project celebrates them with curiosity and joy because they matter, and every hobby has a story. I'm Leslie Eiler Thompson, and it'll be so niche to meet you.
You can find Niche to Meet You on all podcast platforms and learn more about the show at WPLN.org/niche. We do this roundup of Nashville news every weekday, so subscribe in your favorite podcasting app to make sure you never miss an episode. And if you like this, you'll probably enjoy the Nashvillager newsletter, too. You'll get perspective from more of my colleagues at Nashville Public Radio and links to the stories we're following. Sign up for those daily emails at WPLN.org/Nashvillager. Thanks so much for listening. Let's make this day a good one, and we'll catch back up tomorrow.